Cervantes is the wife of Miguel Cervantes, who played the leading role in Hamilton, the musical. Kelly and Miguel have two children, Jackson, who is 8 years old, and then Adelaide, who unfortunately passed away 5 days short of her 4th birthday. Adelaide was diagnosed with infantile spasms, which is a severe form of epilepsy, and other developmental delays and neurodegenerative conditions, which unfortunately caused her to pass away a little less than a year ago. Kelly, through Adelaide, was a stay-at-home nurse as well as an epilepsy advocate. She keeps Adelaide's memory alive by sharing Adelaide's story and journey. She has a blog called Inchstones blog, Kelly Cervantes, as well as she does a podcast called Seize the Day, which is a part of CURE, which is an organization that she's a part of, which is Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy. She also has spoken with Miguel at FACES, Finding a Cure for Epilepsy and Seizures, their annual gala, and she is really making it her mission to find a cure for epilepsy and seizures. Can you tell us a little bit about Adelaide and her diagnosis from birth? Were there any other co-occurring, conditions that went along with it?
Yeah, so Adelaide was a very normal pregnancy, nothing out of the ordinary, and she came very quickly. As if she knew that she had limited time, she shot out in less than an hour, much different than her brother. And I'll never forget, the nurses were holding her and they were talking about that she was floppy. And I just thought, no, she's perfect. All newborn babies are floppy. They can't hold their head up. So I didn't think much of it. We brought her home. She was having trouble gaining weight. She lost well over 10% of her body weight. And we had to feed her by putting little drops of milk into her mouth. And but then she got stronger and she was able to swallow and seemed to be progressing normally. Cognitively, she was there, she was with us, she was tracking, but her physical development was moving a little slower. I want to say it was her 2-month pediatric checkup, and she wasn't yet holding her head up. She wasn't making any attempts to try and roll over. And her pediatrician was like, I think you should try and get in and see a neurologist just to get ahead of this and make sure that there's nothing more serious going on. It took us 2 months to get in to see a neurologist. So she's now 4 months old, still not holding her head up, still not rolling over, not able to sit up with assistance. And at that first appointment, she was diagnosed with hypotonia, which essentially just means low muscle tone. And we started a battery of tests, from, blood tests to MRIs to ultrasounds, anything under the sun to try and figure out what was going on. We were going through that testing, and the next test on the list was to do an EEG. And it was 3 days before she was scheduled to go in and do the EEG, she had her first seizure. She was at daycare and my husband went to go pick her up, and she just went limp on one entire side of her body, almost like a stroke. And that was the first seizure. We took her in for the EEG and she was diagnosed with epilepsy. We started her on a med. Everything seemed to be going swimmingly. She was in PT, OT, feeding therapy. We were starting to see some great progress. She's laughing and smiling, and otherwise cognitively a very normal little girl. We just thought that there was going to be some physical developmental delays. And then at 9 months, she started having very bizarre little head drops, where it would last a split second, and it looked like she was losing consciousness in between these little head drops, and they would come in spurts. So she would have them over and over and over again over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. After about, the second day of this, my husband took her to the emergency room. I was actually in Chicago. We were living in New Jersey at the time. My husband, Miguel, had just booked the role of Hamilton in the Chicago production of Hamilton. And I'd flown out to Chicago to try and find us a home. And I get a call from him that he's taking Adelaide to the emergency room because of these weird head drops. She would then be diagnosed with infantile spasms, which is a particularly devastating form of pediatric epilepsy that can be very difficult to get under control and can cause really severe developmental issues. That said, it can be gotten under control, and some kids go on to lead very normal lives. However, it is less likely that they will lead a normal life if they had issues prior to the diagnosis, and Adelaide had issues. So it was terrifying.
Sure. No, it's a sad situation. But what you and Miguel and Jackson did to embrace her and to have her, she was part of the family, and you probably, we'll get into this, but you embrace her and still and so forth. Is what hopefully, including you, but what parents do. And I know it's an unfortunate situation. She passed away this last fall, shy of her 4th birthday. And I know it's difficult, but you're living on and with her memory and trying to find the cure for epilepsy, so this doesn't have to happen to other children. So in terms of unfortunately her passing, was it the infantile spasms and the seizures that were a result of her passing, or was it the other developmental delays and other complications that she had?
So I think the short answer is we actually don't know.
Okay.
I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding about epilepsy, and that epilepsy is the diagnosis you get after having multiple seizures. However, epilepsy in and of itself is a symptom of another problem, right. Which I know that you know all too well. So it is, in many cases, I want to say the statistic is 2/3 of the cases, the patients actually don't find out what is causing their epilepsy ever. Now, with genetic testing, I do believe those numbers are going down, but it is very difficult to treat something when you don't know what is causing it. So we did genetic testing, multiple rounds, which I'm a huge proponent of. I don't think we can really get a handle on epilepsy until we have more genetic data on that side of it, aside from the traumatic brain injury and acquired epilepsy side. So for Adelaide, we never found a cause. Epilepsy was one of her symptoms. She also had the hypotonia, which I mentioned. She also, and one of the things that made her life incredibly difficult towards the end was actually her mast cell activation syndrome. And I do believe that the two are connected somehow, and that's something I really want to dive into and do more research on as the years go by. Mast cell activation is essentially you have what appears to be an allergic reaction to anything and everything, and it could change from day to day. So your mast cells are everywhere in your body, and they are what process the histamines. So there's histamines in the air and the food you eat, and everything has histamines. A normal person's body can process a 5-gallon tub of histamines, but someone with a mast cell activation disorder may only be able to, their body may be only able to process a cup or a thimble of histamines a day. So once you reach that limit, your body starts to have an allergic reaction. In Adelaide, that was obvious. You would see her cheeks get really pink, or she would get a rash on her face. She would get really irritable. And can be as bad as anaphylaxis. Many mast cell patients carry around EpiPens. Adelaide had one. So that made it very difficult because she would react to meds and to foods. And as she got sicker, it was more difficult to control. But even the mast cell, we don't know what was causing that. Our best guess is that she had some sort of genetic neurodegenerative condition that as of yet is unidentified, probably incredibly rare. And we don't know if it is something that is hereditary, that it was just a horrible match of Miguel and my DNA that it, you know, is a recessive thing. So we have a 1 in 4 chance of our children having it, or if it was a fluke, we just have no idea.
Yeah, it's so hard not knowing, you know, what exactly caused it, you know, and this is obviously a very unfortunate situation and disorder, and we're all trying to find a cure for epilepsy. So when you and Miguel and Jackson, which is Adelaide's brother, or was Adelaide's brother, when you guys all got the diagnosis, you know, how did you guys as a family, I know Jackson was, you know, fairly young, you know, persevere and like manage, you know, this, you know, heartbreaking news?
Well, the diagnoses and the awareness of her condition sort of developed over time. So the infantile spasms diagnosis when she was 9 months old, we had no idea. I still thought that we were going to get this under control and that she would have the potential to lead a fairly normal life. Maybe she wasn't going to get a college athletic scholarship, but you know, neither did I. So we still had a lot of hope. As time went on, and we had gotten the infantile spasms under control, and then they came back, and then the seizures got worse, and she failed med after med. We never had more than 3 months of seizure relief throughout her nearly 4 years. And so as her condition got worse, as more and more symptoms started showing up, you know, you're on a high-speed train and you just can't get off, so you just keep going because you don't really have a choice in the matter. I look back on our life that we had then, now, and it's so surreal what we did, how we lived on a daily basis. I can't even really put into words. You just do what you have to do and you keep going because you don't have any other choice. When we realized that she passed away October of 2019, we started to realize that and get confirmation. We got an MRI where her brain was a bit smaller than it had been in the last one, and that was sort of the last piece we needed to acknowledge that this was neurodegenerative. And that, but even then we didn't know how much time we had with her. We still thought maybe it was a year, 2 years. You know, we called in palliative care and then hospice as it got worse. By August, September, she was clearly really uncomfortable and in a lot of pain. She was having a lot of difficulty breathing. It was just a slow decline over 2019, and then the last 6 weeks it went so fast. So for Jackson, we were very honest with him throughout her entire life about what was going on. We brought him into the hospital with us as much as possible. When she got her G-tube, when she got a VNS, vagal nerve stimulator, when, you know, every procedure that she had, I would work with Child Life in the hospital to have them help me explain to Jackson what everything was going on with Adelaide's body in a way that he could understand, so that he wasn't scared. And he also didn't know any different. It was just his baby sister. And there's something so blissfully ignorant and innocent about that relationship. He was 3 when she was born, and he was 7 when she passed. And even in the end, when we knew that it was probably just, you know, weeks left, you know, we sat him down and we told him that she was going to die sooner than later. And we just kept a very open door. He was in therapy. We had child life services in our home in the end as part of hospice that he worked with. And we just never hid anything from him, and always let him know in a way that he could understand what was going on, and that our door was open and he could ask us anything he wanted.
Yeah, it's always the best knowing that, you can find comfort in your parents, especially at a young age. And, I mean, Jackson's only 7 now, still, not necessarily aware of all these, complications.
Well, and I think it's also, the unknown is much scarier than the known. So if we can explain it to him, then there's less questions. He's not coming up with the answers in his own mind, which may be worse than what is actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
So knowledge is power, even for a 7-year-old. And he would want me to say he just turned 8 weeks ago. So he is now 8.
Okay, 8.
Very important at this time.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Birthdays, I mean, I wish I was it again. As you get older, oh my goodness, lots of other like complications and just life stuff. And I'm 31, so I wish I was 8 again. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the progress, even if it was little, that Adelaide made within her 4 years of living?
I mean, Adelaide was a fighter. She was so feisty. And that's something I hear from a lot of kids who are sort of in these medically complex situations. It's just shocking how their personalities come out. She was nonverbal. She never learned to speak, but that did not mean that she couldn't communicate with us. She communicated through her eyes, through throwing fits. If she did not feel like doing therapy, Adelaide was not doing therapy. And so, she learned a lot of skills, and then unfortunately she lost them by the time she passed away. But, at certain points, she was laughing and smiling. She was sitting. We would get her up in a gait trainer, and she would take assisted steps. She used to hold on to objects with her hands and shake them around. But, at the end of the day, those particular milestones, I realized in our journey, didn't matter. It was, and I say this, it's the name of my blog, is Inchstones. And to me, that is what was so much more important to us, is it may be that, she was well enough that we could take her with us to go eat outside at a restaurant. It was difficult to bring her inside, but perhaps we could eat outside. And she was very chic. She was wearing a mask long before COVID. She knew it was up. Very stylish little lady. And, so it was the Inchstones that mattered to us. It was, she made eye contact a little longer today. And it was, she listened to a whole story, and we could tell that she was listening because her eyes would be open or she would follow along. And it was those things that made so much, that we held on to, that became a much bigger deal than, what she was, technically able to do on a traditional milestone timeline. We held on to those Inchstones, and it's honestly a philosophy that has carried me through her grieving process too, is we just have to be kind to ourselves and appreciate each little positive step in our journey that we're able to make, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how many seizures was she having a day? I mean, she was on medication and so forth. But clearly, the medication wasn't the be all and the end all, unfortunately.
No, the number of her seizures changed over the course of her life as the nature of her disease changed over the course of her life. So, when she was having infantile spasms, it would be, dozens and dozens and dozens of little mini seizures that would come in clusters. When we would get the infantile spasms under control, she would have myoclonic seizures where they were absolutely bizarre. You would pat her on her back and she would slump over and just lose consciousness and then come back. So that was anytime someone accidentally patted her back or held her the wrong way, she would have a seizure. And then towards the end, the seizures were really rough. They would last anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And she would, it was one a day, but she would scream through the whole thing when she was conscious, and then they would cluster. So she would go in and out. Those ones were really hard.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Okay, so you mentioned one of your videos and surfacing on the internet that you and Miguel were always uncertain what the next day would bring with Adelaide. Can you tell us a little bit about what you meant in terms of that, and how did you as a family manage, the uncertainty?
Yeah, there literally was no way to, I mean, was she going to wake up and start having seizures that we couldn't control even after using an emergency med and have to take her to the hospital? Would she wake up and be happy and content and seemingly okay, or would she be screaming in horrible pain or screaming and we had no idea why or what was going on? Was she going to have a horrible reaction that day? Was I going to have to up her antihistamines? Which doctor was I going to call? And it just, there was no way to know. It was like playing a giant game of whack-a-mole. And we just sort of had to take it all in stride. I learned early on that all plans are tentative, and that we just couldn't. With friends, we would make plans, and a lot of times we broke them because Adelaide wasn't doing well, or because we were in the hospital. I mean, we did so many holidays in the hospital, and you just sort of get used to living that kind of life, and your true friends and family understand, and they're there for you regardless. And that, that's how you get through. And for the people who don't understand or they can't hang, it probably has nothing to do with you. They just can't handle the stress of that life, and it's their choice not to, and that's okay too. It was out of our control. We didn't have a choice, and you just sort of let go of what you can't control and micromanage what you can.
Right. No, of course. So your husband Miguel is very well known. He got the star leading role in Hamilton. So through all of this, and you were in Chicago, he was back and forth.
He was in Chicago.
How did that present itself and manifest itself?
Yeah, so he was Hamilton in the Chicago production for the duration of the run. So thankfully, we were all in Chicago all together, and that so that made that piece a little easier. But at 6 o'clock, 6:30 every night, he left to go to the theater, and so I think that was really hard for him. He didn't get to do bedtime with the kids because he was in and out of the house. He would have interviews or press or performances. He was not able to be involved in the day-to-day caregiving for Adelaide, and it was a lot. The last year and a half or so of her life, we had nursing in our home to help because it became even too much for me to handle on my own. So he helped as much as he could, and he loved her and he snuggled her, and and then she passed away in October, and a few days after she died, he got the call that they were going to offer him the role of Hamilton on Broadway. And so in the end of February of this year, 2020, he came out to New York and performed in 10 performances of Hamilton as the role of Hamilton. And then COVID-19 happened and he flew back to Chicago. And we actually just moved back to New Jersey within the last couple of weeks in anticipation, fingers crossed, Broadway opening, probably, not till 2020, but it's nice to be back on the East Coast.
Yeah, no, for sure. Are you guys, this doesn't need to be in the interview, but where's like, where was home prior to Chicago? Was it in the New York State area?
Yeah, so we lived in New Jersey
New
prior
Jersey.
to Chicago, and then we moved to New Jersey right after Jackson was born. And then
Okay.
Miguel and I had lived in New York City for 9 years before that.
Oh, okay. Got it. So in terms of, well, actually, I think a big thing, and the only reason I'm asking this is because other parents would love to hear. So medical expenses, home nurse care, surgeries, doctor's appointments, you name it, can be very, very financially burdened. And, obviously some people have the means to do it and it's wonderful, but not everyone does. And obviously you don't have to disclose whether you were able to do it or not and how you kind of went about it, but and I'm sure are there, like, what type of resources are there to get, X, Y, and Z care? Obviously insurance is one thing, but sometimes organizations, offer X, Y, and Z grant to help, or there's free of charge, or so.
Yeah, we thankfully through the Actors Union had excellent insurance. It was very expensive insurance, but it was incredible, and it needed to be, because I would calculate the expenses billed to our insurance every year, and it typically fell between somewhere in the range of $700,000 to $900,000 a year that insurance was billed. Of course, they didn't pay that, but they negotiate it down. But that is what they were billed. So, that is a conversation for another podcast.
Yeah, of course.
But it was a lot, and but we had great insurance, and thankfully it covered nearly everything. The last year and a half or so, I was able to get Adelaide approved for a Medicaid waiver in the state of Illinois, and that helped significantly with nursing. Our insurance covered a certain number of hours of nursing, and then the Medicaid waiver helped with additional hours. About the last 6 to 9 months or so, I asked for night nursing 2 nights a week, just because Adelaide would wake up in the middle of the night, or she would stop breathing in the middle of the night, and her alarms would go off, and someone would need to either resuscitate her or bump up her oxygen, help her at whatever was causing it, even just wake her up sometimes, and she would start breathing again. But that was a regular thing several times a night. And so it finally got to the point where I needed night nursing assistance. And I will say that every step of the way, I had a very difficult time relinquishing control and admitting that I needed help. In my mind, I wasn't working. And so why couldn't I take care of my daughter on my own? That was really hard pill for me to swallow. But I realized, and everyone told it to me. So I don't know that this helps anyone else, me saying it, because so many people had said it to me, but you can't take care of someone else unless you're taking care of yourself also. And I realized that there was no shame in having someone help care for my daughter. And the most beautiful thing that came out of it was on those days when we did have nursing assistants, on those nights when, I didn't have to be her nurse. I got to be her mother and just love her and cuddle her. And those were things that prior to having the nursing assistants, I didn't get to do as much of as I would have liked.
And it's always nice to feel that you're more of a motherly role than also playing nurse and, caretaking, which obviously comes with, somebody or a child that's very sick. But to have that burden, to have taken that burden off of you, even if it's just, for a little bit, is, it's always nice. So you are a board member of CURE, which is Citizens United in Research for Epilepsy. And I know they're doing tons of research to ultimately find a cure. You also spoke at FACES, Finding a Cure for Epilepsy and Seizures in 2019, which I'm a part of, and I'm a patient of Dr. Oren Davinsky's. Can you tell us from CURE, and I know you're not necessarily involved in FACES per se, but can you just tell us, like, as a board member, what, through CURE and all of that, what research is being propelled to, ultimately find a cure for epilepsy?
I am so passionate about research, and I really do think that it is in the science and it's in the research that we're going to find the answers. And ideally, it's, if new treatments come out of it, then that's awesome. But ideally, what we want is to end seizures and epilepsy, and find that cure. Realistically, there are many different types of epilepsy, and so it's probably going to be several different, a treatment for every single kind of epilepsy. And so this is, it is quite an undertaking, but 1 in 26 people will be diagnosed with epilepsy in their lifetime. This is not a rare disorder. Each individual type of epilepsy, or the genetic cause, or whatever the cause is, that piece may be rare, but epilepsy in and of itself is not. And it's, bringing awareness to that so that the research can be done. CURE does research across the board. They have focused primarily on the basic research and trying to fund new young investigators. So trying to, by giving those young researchers the funds to get into the lab and explore their ideas, then you are because you're investing in them, they will continue to research epilepsy in the future. And so I really love that piece of CURE's model. But they're doing a lot of research on the different mechanisms in the different pathways of the brain. They're working with animal models to test different synapses and trying to get a better understanding of how the different circuits in the brain work. And they have a massive grant from the Department of Defense to do a group research with, I want to say it's 5 or 6 different labs are all participating in a research project for post-traumatic epilepsy. So that's, primarily epilepsy resulting from traumatic brain injuries. And so that is pushing forward. And, it's always fascinating to get to read through the grant proposals. We actually just finished a grant cycle, and I get to call, I actually have to do it today, thank you for reminding me, a researcher, and let them know that they're going to get funded. And, it's just so, it's exciting to talk to these researchers and to give them a patient face and let them know that what they're doing matters. And CURE is a really amazing organization that sort of helps bring the families and the patients. It's patient-focused research is what CURE really focuses on, and bringing those relationships to the researchers and connecting them, and hopefully pushing science forward so that an Adelaide in the future is in better shape than ours.
And also something that's being done more with Dr. Davinsky and at FACES is use of cannabis to treat seizures, which is very effective. Obviously, CURE is doing other stuff, and there's other research going on. There's tons
so
of
much
it
to be researched. Epilepsy is significantly underfunded for the number of people that are affected. The statistics are pretty devastating in terms of the funding.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, funding is very, very important. So how do you keep Adelaide as a family, her legacy, and celebrating her life now, in your family on a day-to-day basis?
We talk about
mementos, I mean, obviously it's an everyday thing. I'm sure you probably think as a family, and I know other people who've lost a child, for instance, specifically to cancer, they consider, well, that's still my daughter, there's six of us. I mean, for you, it'd be like four of you, but, how do you celebrate her and keep her, spirit alive in your family?
well, we have pictures of her all over the house. That's an easy one.
Right.
Um, it was very challenging for me personally to leave Chicago because that was where Adelaide had led a majority of her life. So moving back to New Jersey, even though this is where she was born, she only lived here for about 10 or 11 months before we moved to Chicago. So um, knowing that she's never going to live in this house was very, very hard for me. But one way that I've sort of worked with that is that she still has a room in this house. We share it. It's my office slash her room, and a lot of her things are here. And it's a space that we can share together. It's a space where I can feel close to her, and it's where I do a lot of the writing for my blog. And it's where I will end up recording episodes for the podcast that I host for CURE called Seizing Life. Um, and so that helps. It's keeping her alive in the advocacy that we do. It's keeping her alive in the fundraising for research that we do. It's all of those pieces. We have a partnership with Fairgrounds Coffee and Tea, which is out of Chicago, but they have chains all over the country, and they brew a special bag of coffee called Adelaide's Blend, with a portion of proceeds going back to CURE. Any way that we can get our story out there, anyone that we can get to listen. To me, it is just her life and her struggle cannot have been in vain. I have to know that it meant something. And so this is the advocacy and the fundraising and this platform that we were gifted, this gift of Hamilton being in our lives, and the platform that came with it, and the two of them entering almost at the exact same time, Adelaide's diagnoses of epilepsy, and then the Hamilton, we got news of both in the same week. It just feels like we are meant to use one for the other, and vice versa. So it's that's how we keep her spirit alive. And I don't think that more than 5 minutes goes by without me thinking of her and loving her.
Normal. And she blessed you guys, and she's technically in spirit still part of your family, for 4 years physically, and now spiritually. And it's so nice to hear, because not everyone who's had a child pass have a room dedicated to her stuff, and that's where you do your blog, Inchstones, and your podcast. And it's really nice to hear that you really keep her physically, even though it's spiritually, in your house, and she's still there again, in spirit. So for other parents that have a child with debilitating disorders, obviously fatal too, what advice would you give them, and what do you want other people to know from about Adelaide's story? What's the message you'd like to portray to others?
I think regardless of whether the condition is neurodegenerative, whether how long the child's life is going to be, I don't necessarily think that makes the biggest difference, because so many of these medically complex children, you just have no idea. Is the next seizure going to be the last seizure? Is there going to be another complication? A lot of these children have serious respiratory issues. You're sort of constantly living this tightrope life where you're just hoping to keep balance. And, I think something that is incredibly important is to find a support system. You cannot do it alone. You can't. I thought I could. I couldn't. Um, and that doesn't just necessarily mean, fighting to get nursing assistants. It's about having a community of like-minded people, which I think something like Different Enable is incredible for, introducing people to someone who is in a similar situation. I have an incredible network on Instagram and Facebook of families who their children don't, we never got a full diagnosis for Adelaide, so I have no idea, but families who are in similar situations where they've tried epilepsy med after epilepsy med, where they are in and out of the hospital, where they deal with the breathing issue, having to go on oxygen every time the child has a cold, or, just that medically complicated life. And knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there are people that understand, that can connect with you, that you can lift up and will lift you up in return, that makes all the difference. And then finding where you derive your strength. For me, I got strength from writing and connecting and advocating, in trying to make a difference, in making change. That to me gave me the energy I needed to keep going. For someone else, it might be their daily workout. They have to have their daily workout to keep going. Whatever it is, the communication with like-minded families, or families who are in similar situations. Whatever it is, you have to find what drives you and what's going to keep you going, and make sure that you don't end up on empty. And it's our outcome is awful. There's nothing we could have done about it. I can sleep knowing that we did everything we could for Adelaide. And I guess, when people hear her story, I don't want them to get caught up on the tragedy of it. There's this little girl who's nearly 4 who struggled and died. I want people to remember how hard she fought. I want people to remember that even though we lost her, we still have hope for answers, for a cure, for research, that we are still living life 1 Inchstone at a time, the exact same way that she taught us to. And that those years of her life were incredibly difficult. I wouldn't change them for anything in the world. She taught me more in 4 years than I will ever learn in the rest of my lifetime. So is it tragic? Yes. Is it horrifically sad? Yeah. But let's not dwell on that. Let's focus on making sure this doesn't happen to another child. And let's focus on how hard she fought and how hard we all fought. And that's what I want people to sit with. We're surviving, and we're going to tell her story, and in the hopes that we can make a difference for families in the future.
Great advice. Well, thank you, Kelly.